Hello, I'm Matt Lewis.
I'm Holly Nielsen.
We're here at Gamescom 2025 in Cologne.
And we are just about to interview Matt Cook, who is the senior writer of Anno 117.
This is going to be really interesting. You ready to go?
I think I'm ready.
Let's go and find him.
He'll tell us why the developers chose this moment in history to build their game around, how they adapted the details of real history into the fun, interactive choices given to players of the game. Anno 117, Pax Romana. In the game, the Emperor has appointed you as governor, tasked with developing provinces in the Roman-based Latium region and the Celtic-inspired Albion. You'll be able to choose which region you start with and work to build a small settlement into a civilization that spans both regions. You'll be able to construct and design your settlements in greater scale, detail and flexibility than ever before in the franchise, with all the architectural marvels associated with the height of the Roman Empire. This means big additions like a Colosseum and aqueducts, as well as smaller scale details like children playing with dogs. Successfully developing your empire means walking the line between what the Emperor demands and what the citizens need. And you'll have to balance the needs of your Celtic and Roman citizens, like choosing which gods should be worshipped. Every decision you make will affect the world around you.
Welcome to this first ever live episode of the Echoes of History podcast, a Ubisoft podcast brought to you by History Hit. I'm Matt Lewis.
I'm Holly Nielsen, and we are joined by Matt Cook, who is the senior writer of Anno 117 Pax Romana. Thank you so much for talking to us, Matt.
Oh yeah, it's a great privilege to be here. I'm very happy to be here.
We were trying to think of a first question to ask you to kick this off, and I thought, let's just go with this one. How often do you think about the Roman Empire?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that whole trend cropped up midway through our project, so it was great for us, really. That true, definitely of a lot of team members.
There must be so many things that influence the decisions behind what setting to pick for an Anno game. And why do you think this moment in history works particularly well?
Yeah, so I was kind of there from the outset on this project, and we knew we had to find the next Anno, and of course we consulted a lot of player surveys. That was very important to us to see what the fans wanted. And always at the top was Roman setting, and I think it was just overdue. But yeah, we also knew that we had to find a precise take on that setting, because it's a crowded kind of field when it comes to that. That's the Roman setting. There's a lot of games out there that wanting to do Rome. So we had to find our own little path through it.
And Rome is an iconic setting, which is why so many people want a game set there. But the sources for it, for that period, are very different to those for other Anno games. Think about Anno 1800. You've got a very different set of sources to work with. Thinking back to the beginning of this project, did you find yourself restricted or freed by the different source material?
I think a bit of both. We were putting more pressure on ourselves to get more things right on this project historically. You know, just paying more attention to the context of the world. And you're right, there's maybe less evidence, and a lot of historians will say, oh, we don't actually know for sure about this period, much more than 1800, where, yeah, things are much more evident, but yeah.
How comfortable are you then having to fill that space that we don't know? There must be some responsibility that goes with that, because you're putting that world in front of players.
Yeah, I think what's important for us is to get, we're going to put things in the game that really wind up fans of history. There's no question about that. But if you look back through Anno, it's always been a little bit the case that there's a degree of abstraction from history. In some games, history is taken so seriously, it's like one-to-one almost. And we know we're not that. We know that. But it's important, maybe. I think what I was striving for at the start of the project was to help us find underlying truths of the period through just, reading around and trying to get some good research done and make sure that we kind of hit most of the main notes.
So were there, alongside the historical sources, what kind of pop culture, was there anything, any art, any media that you found the team kind of kept referring back to when creating it? Were there any influences?
Early on, a lot of the choice of setting, for example, came from, for me it was Rosemary Sutcliffe. I don't know if you know Rosemary Sutcliffe, but if you've seen the film The Eagle with Channing Tatum in it, based on the Eagle of the Ninth. This is quite a kind of typical bit of reading for children in the UK, and one I grew up with. And what's beautiful in that is just the description of our province of Albion, as in her words. She was writing speculative fiction. It's so enchanting, and I think that was really inspired us to want to recreate those cities. Thinking more broadly, like Asterix, there's a great image of, I think it's Lutetia, it's like, is the city, and you see these two halves, and one half is Roman, one half is Celtic, and we just thought, yes, this is the thing.
I grew up reading the Asterix comics, so I'm on board for that.
Yeah.
How much are you leaning on things like, horrible histories and things like that?
Yeah.
People are aware of that kind of version of history.
Yeah, I think tonally that we have a lot in common with horrible histories. We even had this idea, in horrible histories, this little rat holds up a sign that says "True Fact," and we actually had this idea. We should do that in the game. We should have some pop-up. And there's just too many pop-ups in Anno, right? We decided not to do that. It's kind of immersion breaking to do that, but it was definitely something we considered because we were pretty proud, actually, of how many things are true. The game's full of facts, and we don't really always sort of say, look, this is a fact, but they're there if you know your stuff.
Having put all of that research in, you must want to say, look, and this is actually real.
Yeah, certainly there are elements of, for example, the game's quests where we put a lot of things forward because we want to focus on those things. The topic of slavery, for example, just to anticipate the question, because a lot of people think Roman period slavery, how will they deal with that? And I think we knew that there wouldn't be a feature, per se, to address it because it's not very Anno. Anno's generally quite a nice experience, and we did feel that, unlike some other games that do tackle it, having this feature in there is a very cynical perspective to have for Anno players, and it didn't really fit with how we think of Anno, how the team thinks of Anno. But it's just it's such an important part of Roman and ancient history. Every culture, the Celts as well, were dealing in slaves. So I think it's very important to have that visible. And so in every story area of the game, you will see loads of stuff about slaves and how they're treated and stories from them.
And are there historians that the team were leaning on? Were you particularly reading anybody's work and passing the books around the office to get a better grip on Roman history?
Yeah, for sure. I think... I think of Mary Beard straight away because she's written some chapters, I think in SPQR. Mainly there were these chapters about the frontier and frontier life and, Rome away from Rome, and helping us to imagine what it's like when Roman culture collides with Celtic culture. And that conflict, actually, between Roman and Celtic, or in fact any other province in the Roman Empire that's far away from the heart, how that actually is and how it feels and how we could imagine it for players. And yeah, that was a lot of fun.
So you've spent obviously so much time developing this game and living in the world of historical entertainment. Do you now find yourself viewing other bits of historical entertainment differently now that you've kind of gone through this process?
Yeah, if anything, I'm less harsh as a critic of historical-based things that aren't entirely committing to the idea of history, because it is difficult to strike a balance between what you're trying to achieve as a fiction. In the end, we're trying to make fiction much more than we're trying to address the history, but we also like to research around and make sure that we include everything that we can to get the history in.
And when players start the game, they're able to choose between governing two different regions, Latium and Albion. Were there kind of real-world inspirations for those two different regions?
Yeah, absolutely. I think Latium... So we know Pompeii and Herculaneum are the best preserved examples of cities in Italian culture from the Roman period. And I think on that basis, really important to kind of draw attention to that part of the world. And also it's very beautiful, the Amalfi Coast and Capri and Bay of Naples. So for Latium, that was really the main inspiration. And also very important, like the spotlight you might notice in the game there's no real reference to Rome. It's Rome itself is not really present in the game. And the reason for that is that it's like the center of a solar system. So that's where the emperor sits. It's brighter than the sun somehow, and the provinces are like planetary bodies orbiting that. And we want players to also be able to build cities that rival Rome, not just to kind of recreate what Rome is like based on the floor plans, but to actually experience building up these provinces and to know what it's like in the kind of lesser known parts of the empire.
And how much was Albion based on kind of Roman descriptions of what places like Britain were like? You know, are you taking what the Romans thought Albion was like and creating a world like that?
Yes, I think so. On the surface, Latium is very, very pleasant and serene and calm, but there's a kind of ugly undercurrent to it, which you hopefully will encounter with a lot of the game's characters and the pirates we have. We call them raiders for this game. But you'll see that kind of seedy underside to it. Whereas in Albion, it's kind of the reverse. On the surface of it, it's all of the myths that the Romans tell each other about that place. It really, there's talk of cannibalism and all sorts of things, probably possibly ill-founded, terrible stories of beasts and what lies beyond the last ocean, But actually, they're very warm and nice people, and also very smart and sophisticated people when you do meet them. So it's kind of a bit of a reversal there.
That's so interesting. I think particularly, I love the idea of not just exploring it, but exploring perspectives of a place is really unique. And I was just wondering, how do different settings, how does it affect the mechanics of the game? And how do you have these kind of different mechanics, but still keeping it feeling like Anno?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the engine, if you like, a lot of the things are the same, a lot of the kind of economy, and that's something that we obviously try to improve in different ways. But I think, for example, the introduction of goods that are really unique to each province and trying to improve our level of accuracy when it comes to what we include based on previous Anno. I think that was very important to the setting. I absolutely love the goods we have in the new game. I mean, some of them are still fantastical. Trousers are not, however. We have trousers and togas, right? And the fact that I'm wearing trousers now, no one's wearing togas unless they're cosplaying. And my colleague tells me this is partly because riding horses, it's pretty awkward if you're wearing a toga. We don't need to get into that, but pretty awkward. And so, trousers just became the main thing. But to the Romans, gens togata, being a Roman was really strongly associated to wearing a toga. And yeah, we wanted to get that across and talk about how barbaric trousers were. In fact, there's an emperor, I can't remember, it's much later actually than our period, but who outlaws trousers and says, right, you're not allowed to wear trousers anymore. Basically because the idea of what a Roman was disappearing with the advent of trousers. It's a very weird idea.
Luckily, we had a chance to play the demo, and we were heartbroken when it finished and we wanted to keep playing. But the fashion was really interesting to me. And I kind of zoomed in, and I love zooming in at these games and seeing all the little people walking around. And I had a bit of incidental dialogue, and it was just a guy saying, I can't wear a toga, I've got knobbly knees. And I was like, that's great.
I think that was the Libertus, who's a freedman. So actually, he can't wear the toga in the game. So that's why he says that, because he never will, sadly for him, because he's on the lowest tier. And he never needs or craves the goods that the later tiers need. That's how the game works.
There are a lot of characters in the game, in Anno, that people will come across and encounter, but none of them are real historical figures. But are there maybe a few historical figures that you moulded these people around? Who were some of the key figures in the period that you were thinking about?
Well, the most obvious one in Albion, which is our version of Britain, if you haven't seen, is Vawada, which is, in fact, one of the names that crops up in some texts for Boudica, as she's more commonly known. Essentially, the antithesis of the Roman conquest in Britain, trying to strike out against Romans, burning Cirencester, and so on, mainly because of terrible injustices, which we don't we deal with slightly differently in our game because it's a more rose-tinted view, and we don't deal with, for example, some of the worst crimes that she suffers. Truly terrible in real life if you get a chance to read into it. But yeah, we have this character. She can be, to some degree, pacified, but you basically have to do a lot of Celtic-centric things in order to get any change out of her at all. So yeah, she's basically modelled on Boudica quite closely, I would say.
And are there Roman figures who influence characters in the Latium world?
For sure. We have emperors. Our emperors really are... we have a female emperor in the game. So again, just to remind that we're not trying to one-to-one do history, because that just would never have happened. It's such a patriarchal society. You would never have had a female empress. An empress regnant, at least. But we wanted to just do that in the game. That's all. And to see if it would be possible, and to find loopholes in Roman society that would allow this to happen, and thereby tell an interesting story through it. But both the female and male empresses are based on kind of composites of various emperors like Hadrian, or really you'd have to listen to the characters to get that. But they are really composites of lots of different emperors. Emperor Lucius we have in the campaign. He tries to sort the imperial papers in his own small office. One of the Roman emperors did this, which we just found so funny, that he tries to sort the papers for the whole empire in his own little study. And it's so ridiculous. So that's, these little anecdotes kind of creep into all the characters, I think.
And in terms of the mechanics, so there are some mechanics in 117 that are an evolution from previous games.
Yeah.
And I was wondering, are there any that are unique to Anno 117 that you wouldn't have had if it wasn't for the setting, that the setting kind of inspired or brought a unique perspective? Yeah,
I think the main one there is if you play in Albion, or Britannia province, it's necessary for you to decide between your population types. So there's a Romanizing population, effectively. You can decide to make your residents more like Romans. They consume Roman things. They want to be educated. They want all of the nice things that Rome ever did for them. And on the other side of it, you can allow your people to just naturally be the Celts that they are. We've always imagined, for example, like in previous Annos, it's always been like a colony sim. So you go somewhere and you colonize. And it was always our intention that here you're actually interacting always with the people that have always lived in that province. They're not coming over on ships. It's just a question of where you lead them, Many of them are drawn to Rome's attractions, of course, but many of them also want to stick on the other side. So I think this feature is, really the quintessence of the project. Yep.
How much are you leaning into the idea of what did the Romans ever do for us? Because there's obviously a bit of Monty Python in there. What did the Romans ever do for us apart from the roads, the aqueducts?
Yeah, absolutely. The Mercator tier, which is like the second-tier resident, Romanized residents, are quite mercenary. They're nice in their own way. Everybody's got nice traits as well, but I always find them a bit kind of, they're after the, all of the nice stuff that Rome can bring them, the kind of the money stuff. Also with the nobles, that's the tier above. So while there's a sort of mercenary aspect to the Mercators, the nobles tier, they're more interested in a career, potentially, back in Rome. But the characters are written knowing that they will never have that. It's like the Alan Partridge of East Anglia or something, where they're desperate to make more of themselves, but there's just no path. No matter if they're good, law-abiding Romans, they live in Albion. And we know from the history that very few Albionites, very few people from that part of the world were ever senators or anything important. So it's a true story.
And as the senior writer, did you feel any pressure about debunking any of the kind of widely held perceptions of the past, or did you kind of have to let that go at a certain point?
Yeah, to a certain degree. I think our function within the studio is as a relatively new part and pillar of Anno, is to encourage others to spend a bit more time with the history and to invest a bit more into especially the design department, working together, collaborating. But also, to a certain degree, we're all making this thing together, and you can lead a horse to water, you can't make it drink. So I think we just want to encourage people to explore these things, but the most important thing, as always with a game, is it's got to be fun. It's got to be, you don't want to bend backwards to try and do something where it's just going to ruin the mechanics. So yeah, we're always interested in, is it fun? Is it good gameplay? And within our team, we have a lot of people with historical understanding and expertise, and they want to put that into practice, and we just pick our battles.
Religion is a big new element for the Anno franchise that appears in Anno 117. How do you go about introducing such a broad new feature that brings in lots of different ancient religions and the ways that they can interact with each other as well?
I think it was, a lot of these city builders in the past have had, for example, religious systems where the gods have been real, in the game, like mythology come alive, and we knew that we were just a bit too close to a more grounded version of the Roman world to do that. So we wanted to show, for example, on the streets, you'll see a lot of candles in the evening, little votive offerings. So a much more kind of transactional idea of religion, it was central to the Roman world. And I don't think, I had to work quite hard to persuade the directors, but essentially we needed to have religion in the game because it was one of the most central parts of Roman life, and it would have been very weird to conceive of the Roman world without it. And we also had this great opportunity because, the Roman Empire is if you imagine it like a body spanning across the whole of Europe and beyond, and it's got this circulatory system, and in that blood flow, you've got goods, ultimately silk from China coming in, but you had goods coming all the way around the empire, and with that, ideas. And for example, a lot of those ideas would be religious ideas. You only have to point at, for example, the Pompeii Lakshmi. This is like a little figurine that they found in the ruins of Pompeii. This is 79 AD, so before our setting. And this figure is, Lakshmi, if you know your Hindu religion. It's called that just because it's a female figurine in a specific pose like this that's just very, it smacks of India. You look at it right away and you think, well, this is just like something you could find now in India somewhere. And that was the power of empire, that these things traveled around. I also think of the pepper pots that are found in Northumbria. I always think that's amazing, that pepper would have traveled all the way from India, where the Romans had kind of ship routes, indirectly probably, passing from one ship to another, gradually making their way all the way to Northumbria so that people could have pepper to put on their food. I can't imagine, I know it's dried, but I can't imagine it would have been the freshest dried pepper, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But it got there somehow.
And so you have this as part of the religion, you kind of talk about how religion and economy and all of this is mixing in this world. And obviously the economy is a huge part of the game, it's a huge part of the Anno series. So how easy was it? Did the Roman economy lend itself well to being turned into a game mechanic, being turned into the Anno game?
I think Anno's got some interesting economic rules that are pervasive. They cross. One of them, for example, is that society's kind of an inverted pyramid. It's topsy-turvy. So the smallest number of people are at the bottom, even though they're actually the masses in the Roman world. So we found a way to kind of tell that story, because in the game, the amount of workforce you derive diminishes proportionally to the volume of the residents. So the patricians actually have the most residents, which is weird. It doesn't make sense, but that's just Anno. But I always imagined, actually, myself, that the amount of workforce that's derived from that is actually correctly a pyramid, and that means that the rest of them must be made up of household slaves, for example, or something like that. But you can fill it in with your own imagination. Basically, there are definitely things where we have to take liberties, and that's mainly because we don't want to destroy the core loop of the game. It's great, I think it's hard to completely overhaul that.
What you talked about the Roman economy being this long chain of of goods that arrive from different places and move around the empire. That must lend itself quite well to the Anno idea, though, that there's this kind of linear production method. You have to create this so that you can create that, and you have to keep that flow of goods and that chain going. And the Roman Empire is doing that on almost a global continental scale. But in the game, you need to do that on a town level.
For sure. Actually, it's I mean, that part of it lends itself very well. And in fact, if you export goods, very interesting things start to happen. So if you take wine to the provinces, it has different statistical attributes than it would when consumed at home. For example, cheese is more fascinating to Romans than they care to admit, and we give them statistical benefits if you import it. So there's a great incentive if you're playing Anno to import goods, because it has huge benefits on top of the fact that you're supplying your citizens, etc. But it's perceived differently. These goods are seen differently depending on where you are.
I'm probably getting more and more invested in the game because cheese is very important to me as well.
Yeah.
And talking about things that are important to us, wine. So you mentioned, of course, when we've been talking in the past, to talk about wine in Britain. And if you could talk a bit about that, because I thought that was so interesting.
Yeah. So, like I said, you can produce things in different areas of the game, and of course, wine isn't an exception, because of course you expect viticulture to be in Latium mainly, but you can make wine if you really want to, and you have the right tech in the game. You can start to produce wine in Britain, but it's about half as good. Nasty sour wine. I think the Romans called it posca, wine that kind of vinegars easily.
Some things don't change. Shouldn't say that when there's British wine producers listening. You did touch on slavery a little bit earlier. I just wanted to come back to that because I wondered how big a decision it was for you, having introduced religion and so many other aspects of the Roman world and kind of built the new mechanics for that. Why was there anything more than the fact that it's not the most pleasant aspect of it that made you step away from the slavery in the game as well?
I think the exact design of the mechanical system that we should use was difficult. And I think that difficulty starts to make you think, okay, we better spend time on other features. That's mainly the thing.
Yeah.
And so just for kind of a development standpoint, you're talking about all these decisions being made. So how does that actually work in development? Obviously, you're a writer. I assume you have a writing team. How do all the different parts work?
Yeah, I mean, I think writers normally sit in on most features. So we try to find ways to enhance the storytelling in every feature. Anno's a game with many complex features, and they're all vehicles for telling stories ultimately. And right down to the items, that we have, we think very carefully about who they are and what they're named. And I really love the item system, for example, because my colleague Keelan put a lot of time into researching historical figures, and if you look closely, you should be able to match the people in the game to the corresponding historical figure, and they're so funny, these little references. So I think, in every feature we try to, if we can, to have an influence to affect them, but sometimes it doesn't make sense necessarily to get involved. Modular ships. We have great modular ships in the game. They're a massive amount of fun, but the amount of narrative there isn't huge. So we avoid that, for example.
Yeah. Holly mentioned earlier that if you zoom in, you can kind of hear little conversations, little snippets of what people are saying, kind of in the street as they pass each other. How much thought and work goes into that? I mean, are you creating huge amounts of scripts, lots of one-liners that you can dot around? How does that work to make it feel realistic when you're listening?
Yeah, among the writers, it makes up at least 50% of the whole project to come up with essentially the dialogue. And in every single line, we're trying to squeeze as much juice out of it as we can. And often that will mean trying to find out what is telling something about the world. How can we forward the setting? How can we forward the story? Yeah, if you listen out in the town, you should hear what we call murmur, which is just random residents talking about their lives. We love doing that stuff, and hopefully you find it funny. Hopefully you find it insightful. Especially on the multicultural topic, I think all of the residents have something to say about their sense of place. Like, how do they feel about the world they're in? as I mentioned previously, we have this Romanization mechanic where you can choose to upgrade in Albion between a more Roman or more Celtic resident. But there's also a tier beneath that, which is like the lowest tier. And the characterization of the Wader, as they're called, is just that they're not sure about what world they're going to be in the future. They've come out of a tribe, they're not sure if they want to be Roman or not, and there's this kind of indecision about them. So we try to attend to every character in that way and through this audio.
I feel like games like this are really wonderful for displaying macro history, these kind of big moments in history, the Roman Empire, all of this, and then also the micro history, represented by the murmur, represented by all of this stuff. And it just works really well because you're physically zooming in and seeing these lives. I spent a lot of time on the demo just doing that. And it works incredibly well.
Yeah, did you use the first-person mode?
No, I didn't.
Well, if you don't know about that, there is a shortcut for that. I'm sure you can look it up. But that's very important, actually. If you're playing the game, it's kind of an Easter egg feature, right? But it's you can walk around your own cities and appreciate them from a very different angle.
That sounds great.
I mean, presumably all of those scripts must amount to an awful lot of words. Do you have any idea of how many lines, how many words of dialogue you had to write?
I think it's in the region of about 100 to 150,000 words for dialogue. And then, of course, we have text as well, which is even more. But, it's a decent amount. And a lot of them are one-liners, so it's, But it's fun. It's really good fun.
It's probably easy to underestimate how much work goes into that, though, because 100,000 words is, a typical non-fiction book.
Yeah.
It's a decent-sized amount of work. There must be a great deal of research and effort that goes into just crafting those throwaway one-liners almost.
Yeah, for sure. Speaking from my point of view, I always think for us it's primarily about characterization. So having the seed of a character, I mean, they're probably based on a historical figure, but having a character with a voice and a personality is more important, I think, than selling the history, in my view, because you want people to connect with those characters. And I think that's where we start every single character in the game. And then, of course, the history inevitably gets swept into that character and their voice and everything. Yeah.
We've spoken a little bit about the food, the cheese and the wine, and I have on my notes here, birds' tongues and jelly.
Yeah. Well, there's a King Crimson album. I don't know if you're into prog rock, but there's a King Crimson album called Larks, Tongues and Aspic. I think from the 1970s. Sounds like a big tangent here, but basically we needed the idea of excess in the game, like Roman excess, especially for the latter classes. The patrician especially is really into new fashions, odd things, and they sort of hold their nose as they eat them, but to be seen eating this stuff is very important. And I'm sure there'll be loads of this in the future if we ever do any more stuff. I'm sure we will. But for example, inspiration for this came from things like Romans drinking blue drinks, having blue-themed dinners for themselves, that kind of sense of excess, decadence. I think it only comes with the sort of society that the Romans managed to establish for themselves in this era of great comfort and, relative peace. And, that's what we really liked about this setting in the end.
And you've got kind of gold mines that are powered by aqueducts, so you're able to create these vast Roman structures of things like aqueducts and then put them to work in your town as well. Yeah,
that's the Dolocalthi mines in Wales, where there's some archaeological finds there, essentially that show that the Romans used water to kind of jet wash away the top of the mine to find gold more quickly, and this was seemingly powered by aqueducts and other water technology. So, of course, we put that in the game. You can find that in the tech tree.
Is there any kind of particular aspect of development that you thought that was just particularly fun for you to do, like on a personal level?
Yeah, I mean, I do think the goods are very interesting. I think Romanization is a very interesting topic. The thing about the Romanization system is it's quite abstract in some ways, but I think the most important thing is you get put on the spot as a governor to have that feeling, to make a decision about how the future will be. And I know from the history a lot of governors would write back to their to the emperor and say, look, what do I do in this province? It's really weird here. Please help. And the emperor's like, you work it out. I'm too busy, essentially, in a nutshell. And we wanted to create, I think the emperor system as well, like having this person above you. And so to have to answer to the emperor will make demands of you in the game. And to be kind of between Scylla and Charybdis, to use the classical, a rock and a hard place, right? Between the emperor and what the emperor wants and what the people of your province want. And to be in that position as a governor, I think that's really cool. And you get a lot of decision quests about this, a lot of individual smaller choices. It's a lot of fun. Yeah.
And reflects the genuine history. You know, on Echoes, we've been exploring how the Roman Empire worked and what would be expected of a governor. And one of the things is you govern. You know, the emperor's appointed you. You go away and govern. Don't come asking me every single question. But the governor has to work out, you know, how much of an iron fist he is, how much of a kid glove is he wearing, how much is he going to allow people to carry on the way that they were before, and how much is he going to try to Romanize them? Is that something that the game will encourage people to think about?
For sure, yeah. I mean, like, I'm a terrible governor, for example. Like, and I think the game will just allow you to kind of find your own space. There's so much flexibility in the game compared to previous games. I think you can, you know, morally, economically, you know, there's a lot of decisions to be made, and you have to position yourself accordingly to maybe to your own values even. And I think that's exactly what Roman governors did. Some of them morally completely bankrupt, you know, embezzling all of the taxes and all of that stuff. So I think, I mean, you can do that. The emperor will quite often demand money from you, for example, and you can decline. You can routinely embezzle.
Sounds great. Is there any history in the game that you think listeners will think or players will think is just unbelievable? It can't possibly be true, but it actually is.
Yeah, I mean, in the campaign we have. So, I mean, look, I wasn't there, but Emperor Claudius supposedly had an elephant in Britain and rode it around as part of the victory parade, and that's something we have in our campaign story. Spoiler, but essentially we wanted to have that because I think it's not just a superficial thing, like here's a sensational bit of history. It really is there to show, again, like, I mean, elephants are from North Africa. The Roman Empire is a Mediterranean empire. It's not a Northern European empire. So these things were quite normal, and Britain is not. Britain's the weirdest place in the world, and yet they brought an elephant there. And I just love the imagery of that, and yeah, elephants sailing on ships through terrible seas to get to Britain, and you know, maybe just rolling around in the mud, you know, squirting water, and the locals are just bemused. That was always something that we had in our minds, thinking about, you know, the clash of cultures, really.
And that must have been where you really wanted your little pop-up to say, this is real. You know, there must be a fear that you've kind of put all of that effort into the historical accuracy of it, and players will just think, this can't be true.
Yes, I mean, there are things that aren't true in the game, and I maybe draw attention to one which I personally wanted in the game, even though I knew it probably wasn't a real thing, and that's in the marshlands you'll see lots of people walking around on stilts. We don't know if people did that. We have no way of knowing. I mean, I just read the ramblings of a farmer somewhere on the internet who said, oh, I bet the Romans rode around in the Norfolk fens on stilts. That would have been the obvious thing to do. And I just had this image seared into my mind, and then we knew we had to do it in the game, and I think it's fine.
I mean, you may have answered this with the wonderful elephant anecdote, but I know as game writers, you like to sneak the odd little thing in there. So did you put in any Easter eggs into the game that you can talk about?
Yes, I mean, maybe actually not something from the writing team, but we have a lovely theatre in the game, so you can build a theatre at some point. And if you are in that first-person mode we talked about, you can position yourself correctly and look into the theatre, and inside you will see a very famous event from Roman history playing out on the stage. Yeah, so keep an eye out for that. Oh, also, because you mentioned Monty Python, you can play as a character called Biggus Discus.
Is there anything in particular that you would hope the people who've joined us here today, people who've been playing the demo, people who will eventually play the game, listeners to this podcast, is there anything that you will hope that they will take away from the game, either in terms of the history and or the gameplay?
Yeah, I hope I've done enough to sufficiently distance us from real history to also say, look, we want to inspire people with the history. There's no question about it. We're desperate for people to find all the references if they can. But also, just maybe as a starting point, is what we really hope for, to explore the real history a lot further and get into it, because it is, history at the end is a discussion, and it's not a set thing. One interesting thing that happened in the project is that so our Latium setting has this basis in Pompeii, and we wanted to have a kind of Pompeian feeling, including the Vesuvius eruption and the aftermath of that. And so what we did was we wanted players to recapitulate that, going back under the shadow of the volcano and finding themselves in this slightly creepy atmosphere. And then we saw very recently, there was a BBC article about just that what we'd imagined, and it was just guesswork, was also true, because of course people did go back after the eruption, and that's a weird thought. I mean, what would they have felt going back to the ruins of Pompeii, trying to build up a life there? It was just a fascinating thought.
Well, I mean, you'll be delighted then to know that there is a perfect podcast for anyone who would like to learn a little bit more about the history behind some video games, Echoes of History, brought to you by Ubisoft and History Hit. We focus on Assassin's Creed a lot, but we're also delighted to be talking about Anno a lot in the build-up to Anno coming out. So thank you so much for joining us, Matt. It's been absolutely fascinating to get under the skin of the game a little bit more and find out how it came to be.
Yeah, it's an immense privilege. Thank you so much. And thanks everyone who's here as well in the audience.
Yeah,
thank you so much,
Thank
Matt.
you very much.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching Echoes of History. If you enjoyed this video and want to learn more about the real history behind the Assassin's Creed games, then subscribe for more episodes. You can check out the extended interviews wherever you get your podcasts by clicking the link in the description. You should also hit the links that are floating on the screen somewhere. Are they on my face?